Hello, and welcome to the TRC Podcast. My name is Jake. Today is February 15th, 2023, and this week, a new season of auto racing begins. As we speak, cars are in tech for qualifying at the Daytona International Speedway in preparation for the biggest race in all of NASCAR, the Daytona 500. The qualifying will start around the time we'll be wrapping up our taping of the show here, and we'll have the usual bevy of events for Speed Week, with the dual 150 qualifying races tomorrow, then trucks, ARCA, Xfinity, and on Sunday, the big one. And with that, we also start Season 2 of the TRC Podcast. As those who have followed us from the beginning know, we didn't start this until May of last year, so this will be our first quote-unquote full season. So this gives us an opportunity to watch things progress and analyze how they're going without having any real prior knowledge, which is an exciting thing for us. We get a chance to speculate without basically starting from a blank slate, so that's really cool. But anyways, just to give us a brief reintroduction to ourselves, we are a community of race fans that have been corresponding with each other online and offline for the better part of a decade, starting out as posters on the now defunct Racing Reference comment sections, which has evolved into a Discord community that we now talk daily on. I won't belabor the details any more than that. If you want to know more, just listen to our introduction episode from last year. So I'll just say that with us today is my co-host Ryan of RJM Analytics, Adam,
What's up?
Our sort of third member, Jack, aka Jimmy Fan from our community, making his third appearance, and for the first time since episode 8, one of our OGs, Merv, is here. Now, I didn't really plan out what we would do here for this first little section before we get into the analysis, so I'll just kind of let you guys talk about what you want, whether it's racing related or not. So, I guess we'll start with you, Ryan. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I'm excited for this new season to get started. I guess in terms of myself, what I've been up to, these past couple of days, I've been really trying to work with this whole, I think I've mentioned it on the RJM Analytics Twitter a couple of times. I'm trying to create like a predictive sort of metric that projects certain ratings into the future. I think it's kind of, since I talk about college basketball on there a lot with the metrics that I have there, it's sort of loosely based on what Ken Pomeroy does, kenpom.com, the sort of gold standard of college basketball analytics, and what he does, like every year at the start of the year, there's like projections of what teams are expected to be good and all that stuff, and it's usually accurate. Sometimes he'll have, like, I think this year it was Kentucky was like the top team in the preseason, and now they're not that good at all. But usually it can kind of bring things to light that people wouldn't expect. So I think that's kind of my goal with this, is to do something similar to that, which essentially what I'm doing is creating like a trend line of whether or not a driver is currently outperforming their general running average, or whether or not they're declining. But essentially what it all starts with is the power rating that I don't have for the recent seasons yet, but I have it through the middle of 2011, where I've been commuting, and it's pretty much a running average, sort of like an ELO rating, like they use for chess or Scrabble, or 538.com I know uses those for stick and ball sports. But it's a bit harder in, a full field of drivers as opposed to just a one-on-one matchup. But basically a running average weighted towards most recent events. Each one weighs more than the last one of, how good somebody is pretty much at this moment. And then the trend line that I use will increase or decrease that depending on whether or not the driver is trending upward or downward. So I've gotten through about halfway through 2008 so far with it, and there's definitely been some things that it's revealed that I definitely excited to move forward with. So I will definitely be sharing more about that in the coming weeks and months when I get it developed to the fullest. And yeah, other than that, I don't think there's a whole lot to say about analytics. Unfortunately, I can't can't really give a preview of this year who the projections are favoring because I don't have the power ratings done through up to present day, but we'll definitely that's definitely something that the future of RJM Analytics is definitely going to include. So, yeah.
All right, I'll go next. I would say this is the most excited I've been for a NASCAR season in a very long time. And that's because NASCAR has made a lot of great changes over the offseason to things that, frankly, I've been wanting them to do for a long time. Most notably, removing stage cautions on road courses, which have completely disrupted the flow of those races since 2017. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun to get to see how those races play out naturally now. And also having the choose rule at every race except road courses, because the Bristol dirt race desperately needed the choose rule. And I think it'll be interesting to see how teams choose their lines in plate races this year. Like, are they going to will a team sacrifice several rows to just be in the same line as their teammates? Who knows? We'll see. And also, I think it'll be good with the work that NASCAR's done to fix the short track and road course package, which, let's be honest, those races were not very good last year. But this year, I have hope with the diffuser being taken off and the spoiler being shortened that those races will be a lot better. So I think it's going to be a fantastic season, and I can't wait for it to get started.
Yeah, I would say same thing here. I think I'm just really excited for the season, and I think it's going to, there's, after last season what we saw with the just parity and the competition and the overall racing, I think we're in line for a really good season. It's going to be another exciting season with good racing, I think, at all tracks. And like you said, I'm glad they finally got rid of those stage cautions at the road courses where, depending on where you are, it's a quarter of the race almost if it's too long of a caution or if something happens, which I think long overdue, but it's done now, so I'm looking forward to that. And I think I'm just, in general, the season starting, you're always looking forward to the biggest race of the season coming up in, 4 days from now? So excited for that as well, and I think it's be a fun season. I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, first of all, I'm glad to be back. It's been a while. Thank you all for having me back. I echo everything that's been said, so I don't have too much to add. The 2022 season was probably one of my two favorite seasons in the time that I've been watching NASCAR, which is since 1998. So pretty large sample size there, and yeah, I'm super excited. Like, the depth of this field right now, I think, is the best that we've had in probably a decade, if not more. And the parity that we've seen, it remains to be seen how long this parity is going to stretch out. But yeah, I don't know. I'm super excited for this season to start, so I guess we'll just get into it.
Yeah, I think for my thoughts on the season, I'm definitely I'm intrigued by, whether or not last year is going to end up being kind of this, once-in-a-generation sort of season with all the changes we had going on, whether or not we're going to start to see kind of some trends really shake out, this whole new sort of, I guess, hierarchy at the top of the field with all the veterans are pretty much either retiring or declining now, and I think last year just really brought the new breed of guys, kind of completed that sort of takeover. So now I'm wondering whether or not that's going to continue, or if we're going to see sort of a lot of the, the unpredictability of you never know who's going to run up from where. But yeah, I'm definitely excited, and hopefully the issues with last year's car, the short track package, the road course package, the injuries, hopefully a lot of that is resolved, and definitely agree on the stage cautions at road courses. I personally don't think they should have them anywhere. Or if they do have them, the caution laps shouldn't count because they just eat into green flag laps and take way too long. But yeah, especially on the road courses where it screws up the whole strategy and everything. Definitely excited to have that out of the way.
Yeah, from my point of view, last year, which we already went over it at the end of last year, most of us except for Merv, but just to kind of quickly refresh, it was a season of conflicted feelings for me because from a personal standpoint, with my drivers and the guys I like, it was kind of a rough one. It was pretty frustrating. There was not a whole lot that went right for my drivers, especially in the second half of the year. But from an overall entertainment standpoint, it was certainly one of the best seasons that I've ever had the privilege of witnessing. The first half was just amazing. It kind of petered out a bit towards the end with the racing quality. It kind of, after I think people got the car figured out more, and there was less kind of chaos and incidents. There wasn't as much, I guess, to really get excited about, but we still had some really good races here or there. And as you guys alluded to, the competition level was the highest that it's been since at least the mid-2000s. I mean, you could make an argument that it's one of the top 5 or at least top 10 most competitive seasons ever. I would say personally it's the most competitive one since at least 2003, with just the depth that you had. Obviously 19 different winners and probably about maybe 23 or 24 cars that realistically could contend on a week-to-week basis, and about 20 that could legitimately win on speed. But as far as this year goes, I'm cautiously optimistic about it, that it'll be a bit more enjoyable from my standpoint with my drivers. But also, as great as last season was, it almost kind of made me long for some sense of normalcy, where we still had some excitement and chaos like we'd had last year, but we also have kind of the usual trends that we always see through the season. I mean, I guess that's just kind of natural. And so, as far as what I think is going to happen this year, it's not going to be like last year, but it's not going to be like 2021 either, where it's just one or two guys that are dominating most of the time. I think it'll kind of be a medium in between the two. I don't think the intermediate racing will be as good as it was last year, but I do think the short track racing will certainly be better. I'm not as optimistic about the road course racing, but hopefully I'm wrong about that. But the short track racing, I mean, it really can't get much worse than Martinsville last year, especially that spring race. So there's no really to go but up with that. And
well, I thought we got off to a good start with that with the Clash a couple weekends ago. I guess we can talk about that for a few minutes.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I thought that was a better race overall than last year's was.
Definitely better racing. Unfortunately, it did turn into, a crash fest. But, yeah, it definitely, the whole thing, especially last year with the Clash, it was like, there's not a whole lot that we can take from this and apply it to the season, because it was the very first race with this car. And, there was just so many unknowns. But now that there's, these guys have a season under their belts with the car, I think, I think this year's Clash, we can probably take a little more from it. Like, the Toyotas.
Championship.
Yeah. But, like, the Toyotas specifically is what I'm thinking of. Like, they looked super good in the Clash. So I'm wondering if that's maybe something that's going to carry over a little more. Of course, then again, it's like Ryan Preece led the most laps, and it's like that's probably not going to happen most weeks either. So yeah. I don't know. It's a toss-up, but I think there's probably more that we can take from the Clash applying it to future races this year than last year.
Yeah, the racing I think overall will be solid. Maybe a tiny bit of a step down from last year, but I wouldn't be surprised if we honestly did match the parity and competition we had from last year, where what do we have? 15 different winners going into the postseason.
16.
It was actually 16 because
I think Dylan was the 16th at Daytona.
Blaney didn't. Oh yeah, because Kurt won. Yeah. All right. So, I don't think it's unfeasible to see going into the playoffs we have 15 different winners. I think there'll be a few guys who won't win who won last year, but I also think there's going to be a couple guys who didn't win last year that will. Actually Blaney and Truex come to mind. I think it could be pretty similar in that regard in terms of the number of winners we have. But we had a lot of guys though last year with just 1 to 2 wins, and I think there'll be a few more with 4 to 5, somebody with 6. So kind of like a mix of your 2021, I guess, and last year, sort of like a hybrid of that. But I think the competition will still be there, and it'll still be fun throughout. So I'm looking forward to it, and I think we could definitely see some surprise winners as well.
Yeah, if I had to guess right now, I would say we'd probably have 14 to 16 winners this year. But as far as the competition level goes, going off of just pure wins isn't really the right thing to go off of when you're judging the parity of the season, because so much of that is just dependent on circumstances. Like 2021, we actually had 16 different winners, but it was not that competitive of a season. It wasn't bad from a parity standpoint, but it certainly was not what that win total made it seem. But, I'll be happy if we have a situation once again where we have pretty much 20 cars or maybe a bit more that can legitimately contend for a win on any given week. Like, it may not be often or more than a couple of times, but if we have that kind of level again, I'll be happy with it. So,
yeah, funny you just said that. Made me think of 2011, which is the season that I'm almost finished with doing my metrics for, I guess, except for the power rating thing. But everyone throughout that whole season was like, "Oh, what a great year! We've had all these surprise winners and all this parity." And but I am through 25 races. There have been 8 different TDR winners in those 25 races, and one of them was Regan Smith in the Daytona 500. So that barely even counts.
Thank you, Kurt, for pushing.
Yeah. So yeah, just obviously, I think just looking at win totals alone, you've been over this 100 times, doesn't tell the full story. Although that season was, I'm through these 25 races. There's only 3 drivers with a TDR above 150 for the season. Only 6 above 140. So it's definitely very close, and the middle of the pack. A lot like last year, you can have great parity even if the same guys are winning or the same guys are contending. I'm gonna say for this year though, I'll go with 16 on the dot for different winners. I don't think we'll have the same amount of guys who just come out of the middle of the pack and have the best car every week, but I do think there's 15 or 16 different guys who you can say can easily contend for a win, without it feeling like some sort of fluke. So I definitely like the direction we're going with that moving forward. And then even outside of those guys, like we saw in the Clash, someone like Austin Dillon or Ryan Preece could randomly contend one week. And I guess I'll definitely, I'm not the happiest guy in the world about Cole Custer getting booted. We're probably the only racing community on the planet that still thinks Cole Custer had some potential. But if Preece is able to at least look competent in that car, then I won't be too upset. Just as long as Custer absolutely destroys Riley Herbst and gets rid of any sort of talk that he's any good.
I was waiting to see when the Preece ranting would be, so I'm all for it. If you want to go ahead, we can get right to it.
He's a good short track driver. I think everybody knows that. But I'm definitely not expecting him to be any better than Eric Almirola, who
I think like there's like a principle that he is a good short track driver because he came out of the modifieds and they run tons of those bull rings up in the Northeast. But just looking at his Cup career to this point, and again, this is he hasn't been in Cup like with this car yet. Like he was primarily in Cup before with like the 550 package and stuff, so it's hard to say. But like so far, what I've seen from him in Cup is basically he's just like a plate driver that's occasionally runs good on plate tracks, and that's about it. Maybe did he have a couple like decent road course races maybe too?
He had like that one part
there was like
of
that Roval that one year where he
the
right.
Roval.
But I mean, I just think people I feel like want to hype him up, because he's this blue collar guy, had to run it all the hard way. Took that flyer on the Gibbs ride for a couple races and won some races, but it's like what he did in Cup those 3 years. It's as if people forget that ever happened, where he was getting beat by Ricky Stenhouse, who's pretty mediocre, and it's like basically they just replaced Cole Custer with an older, lower ceiling version of Cole Custer. But,
right.
If it's a short-term gain, then it is what it is. Custer will probably be back in Cup as long as he does what I think he's going to do in Xfinity this year, which is he and John Hunter Nemechek will just absolutely steamroll this field. It's not like it's worth losing sleep over.
Yeah, from my standpoint, he was when he was full-time in the 37 car in 2020, he was pretty much the worst driver in a decent competitive ride that there was. And to his credit, I think he has, with his runs in the lower series and whatnot, gotten a bit better. I mean, it is possible for a guy like that to improve, but he's still, at best, in my opinion, a 25th place driver. And, it is crappy the way that he got this ride and the way Custer was booted, but, it is what it is. SHR is going to make the decisions that they want, and, hopefully in a couple of years, it'll bear out that Preece is what he is, and everyone will see it, and everyone will see what Cole Custer really is, and he'll be back in a good ride, whether it's with SHR or not. So it's a bummer right now, but in time, I feel like it'll sort itself out.
Well, I think the elephant in the room here is who's really running the ship over at Stewart Haas Racing right now. Why is Eric Almirola still there? Because Smithfield is basically not allowing him to retire. That's what really started all this. Is if he just stuck to his guns and said I'm not going to race next year. First of all, they would probably have Kyle Busch in the 10 car. So there's that they missed out on. But now with Harvick leaving, it's like who's
and that's not to get too into like 2024 silly season, but just today we saw Bowman re-signed with Hendrick. He's locked up through like 26 or something. Suarez re-signed with Trackhouse. That was two of the big, quote unquote, big fish that we were going to have for this silly season as far as free agency goes. So it's starting to dry up quick for Stewart Haas to see who they're going to get. I assume it's if like you were saying, Ryan, like if Custer does what we all think he's going to do in Xfinity, like I think they're going to have no choice but to bump Custer back up. I don't know. I am like still pretty high on Cole Custer, so I won't get too into that. But
speaking of which, though, guys that we're probably higher on than most of the NASCAR fan sphere, especially on Twitter and places like that. But you just mentioned Alex Bowman. I think.
Excuse me, his name is Weakest Hendrick Driver, WHD. Get it right.
Yeah. I think, though, that's a guy who, if people are looking at, a possible sleeper this year who could really take another step and surprise people. I really like the move they made at crew chief. I've never been a Greg Ives fan at all, going back to my Dale Jr. fandom days.
Amen.
And I think Blake Harris is really good, given that he was able to make a complete scrub like Michael McDowell look serviceable. So I obviously we can't go too much into, the clash and all that, but Bowman ran really well there. It was the best Hendrick car all night in that race, and I kind of think, what we saw at the beginning of 2020 with him, if he can get into that zone again, we know he's capable of it, and I just think that, as long as he's fully healed from that concussion that he had, he's really going to do a lot better than people are expecting and shut a lot of people up.
I think he's going to be awesome with Blake Harris. So Blake Harris, his history is he goes back all the way back to Furniture Row. He was Cole Pearn's car chief on the 78. He's played a huge part in that run that they had with Truex, and then he went to Gibbs as well. And I'm probably higher on Ives than a lot of people, but I do think it was time for a change there with Bowman. It just because things get stale after a while, and kind of seemed like they I guess plateaued a little bit with their as a duo. But I think Bowman's gonna be awesome with Blake Harris. Everything we've seen of him to this point, I'm not saying he's gonna be this guy's gonna win 50 Cup races or something, but I still think we have yet to see his full potential. And I know Jake likes to do the weakest Hendrick driver thing, and I do think he's the fourth best driver at Hendrick, but that doesn't mean he's not a good driver himself. I think he's very capable of having some really awesome seasons. And so
the only thing
I think he's gonna be good with Tears.
Yeah, the only thing that gives me any kind of reservation is I absolutely think he has that kind of potential. It's just we have such wealth of competition now and so many different good drivers and good rides now that we haven't had in a long time. So it's going to be kind of hard to beat that on a week-to-week basis, but I certainly believe in him and a driver as his potential.
I think Bowman is definitely kind of a victim of that whole he's a young guy. People forget, that he's still, this is only his sixth full season in Cup in a good car. And 2018, it could even be argued that wasn't a good car.
No, I don't think so at all. And quietly, sorry to interrupt, but quietly, 2018 is actually super underrated season for him as far as how bad Hendrick was.
Yeah, I just think what I'm trying to say is that somebody like him who's not an elite talent but still a good driver, maybe very good, on his best days, just gets overshadowed by this kind of youth movement. It's for kind of a historical, parallel, that Steve Park, who I just wrote about on my latest What If series thing, he was a great driver, looked like he was going to be potentially a great driver his first couple seasons. Had injuries, though, and then by the time he came back, he'd just been completely swallowed up by, Dale Jr., Jimmy Johnson, Tony Stewart, all the other young guys from the early 2000s. So, but it's I still think Bowman obviously has potential. So, it's not like he's a bad driver just because his teammates are better than him.
Yeah, I think what we kind of think of is I don't think we've ever seen Bowman, correct me if I'm wrong, in Cup without Greg Ives as crew chief. I believe, wasn't he when he's in 2016 for Dale Jr., I believe it's been Greg Ives.
That was Ives.
Yeah.
Ives
he's been, as long as Bowman's been at Hendrick, he's had Ives to this point.
Yeah, so I think it'll be interesting just to see how, much of a driver Bowman is outside of that Greg Ives bubble that he's had his entire Hendrick career, There's only been a few guys you've seen even at this point in time since 2018 have the same crew chief for that long, and it's going to be interesting, especially for a guy who's probably developed a lot in those 5 years at Ives. So I'm really curious to see just how he does with a new crew chief. I think it was a great hire, and I think will fit really well with Bowman. But I think it's going to be. I think he's going to have a pretty good year. Win a couple of races for sure.
Yeah, I actually want to go back to the Ryan Preece thing for a minute, and my real takeaway from that hire is how piss poor Ford development pipeline is, and just how bad their hiring strategy is in general. I mean, they clearly have the worst driver lineup of the three manufacturers in Cup, and they probably also have the worst driver lineup in the other two series as well. When you look, you guys touched on it a little bit, but like, who do they really have as a superstar once Harvick retires? I mean, I guess Penske, Logano, and Blaney are going to continue to be great for the next, 5 to 10 years probably. But other than that, I mean, who do they have? Like, it's actually kind of. Say that again.
I was going to say Briscoe is probably the only other guy. I think you can even argue.
Zane Smith is like the only prospect.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Well, and it's like, after Almirola's gone, who's SHR going to bring? Is it going to be Custer? And are they going to keep Priest, or are they going to try to get Zane, or are they going to poach somebody? But I mean, with Tony focused on his drag racing and Gene doing whatever corrupt billionaires do, it's like it doesn't seem like they're even really giving a damn about SHR, and it just feels like a rudderless ship to me. And I have little confidence that they're going to make the right hiring decisions going forward.
I mean, if it was smart of SHR, they would, I think, downsize the three teams. With the Ford development, is there enough drivers out there to actually have a good competitive four-car team? At least for the ones that you can actually sign right now. Like, it's you can get a three-car line, but at that point you're gonna have to fill the 4, the 10. Eventually, you're going to fill. The 41, and Briscoe's the only one who's a solid. He'll be around for a while. The other 3 rides are going to be, I still think, up in the air in the next few years. So I think you go down to 3 teams through SHR and try to get just some better talent in there. I don't think a 4-car team right now is the right move for them.
Even then, it's like if they had a 3-car team, it would probably be, a year or two, Briscoe, Priest, Custer. That's not exactly a murderer's row right there.
Yeah, I mean, right now they're in a situation sort of with Roush was a few years back with what year was that? I guess 2014, 2015, 2016.
After they lost Edwards,
yeah, because they had Biffle, who was, he's not the same as Kevin Harvick, but you had a washed-up veteran, and you had 2. In the other case, you had Trevor Bayne, and who else did they have?
Ricky
was in the
Stenhouse.
Stenhouse. I mean, I just don't. I don't know where they're going. I don't know the direction and what they're trying to do, but they just don't seem like to me like they want to be a true contending team.
Yeah, I mean that's who they remind me of, honestly, is Roush after Edwards and Kenseth left, and it's like we've seen how they precipitously declined from a juggernaut to a struggling 2-car team at the end of the 2010s. And then essentially they had to be rescued by Brad investing in them. And, who knows where that'll end up. But, yeah, I mean, I think SHR is the new 2010 Roush. And I think they should downsize to 3 cars. Hell, maybe they should even downsize to 2 cars. And, just focus all their energy on like, Briscoe and maybe one other guy. And let another Ford team, have their charters. And because, frankly, the other 4 teams seem more invested than they are, and I think that would be better for everyone. But, I don't know. I think Jack Roush is too prideful to do that because, he is who he is.
I mean, to be frank, at this point, I don't think he's really running the show much anymore, which is a good thing. I think he's
who even is running the show over there? I mean,
are we talking about?
Are we talking about Roush or SHR?
Oh, Roush.
Yeah, I thought we were talking about SHR.
I meant Roush. Sorry.
There's 2. The SHR. I mean, I don't know. Elena.
As far as like RFK goes, that's 1,000% Brad is running the ship right now.
Yeah, I actually think they're on the rise. I think they're going to be.
Yeah, me too.
I mean,
I think they're already better than SHR, and I think they'll be maybe not back to what they were, but they'll be a team that can win races and make the playoffs every year for foreseeable future once they get younger drivers. I mean, Bush is fine, but he's not, number 1 driver on a top team material. But
right. I mean, if they
could get somebody like Zane Smith,
it'd be our favorite to pick up that third, one of those charters for sure, and go up to 3 teams. I think they will eventually go up to 3 teams, but they'd be the one if SHR were to go down to 3 teams and pick up that charter and have a team for probably Zane Smith.
Yeah, that's what I think should happen. I don't know if it will happen, and I have a weird feeling that Chevy or Toyota might poach Zane Smith before that happens because, it seems like that happens a lot nowadays. But if he stays in the Ford pipeline, yeah, I think it'll be Buescher, Zane, and then Brad will probably retire from driving in the next 2 or 3 years. And then, I mean, I don't know who the third guy there would be necessarily, but who do you guys think?
Sounds like Zane is pretty much on track to be with Front Row full time next year, especially after they decided to basically stab Todd Gilliland in the back for no reason.
Yeah.
It's not going to be the end of the world if you just run a third car for him in a couple of races. But speaking of teams that are really shittily run, this is now going to be the 4th, probably 5th year in a row that they have a different driver in the 38 car, no stability whatsoever. And meanwhile, your other driver just lost the only reason that he was looking any good. So, I guess it would be a bit karmic for Front Row if, somebody poaches Zane and Todd ends up leaving and they have to search all over again. So,
as far as Zane goes, I think I do think he's going to end up in a Ford Cup car probably next year. The question is, which ride that is, whether it's, I could see a situation where he ends up with, especially with Harvick retiring and say if Almirola also finally sticks to his guns, is look, I'm retiring. I don't give a shit what you guys at Smithfield want me to do. I could see a situation where Zane ends up in a Stewart-Haas car. I could also even see Zane going to the 21 car because Ford is apparently really high on him. And that was, I think I talked about this last year during, was it Gateway, where he filled in for Buescher? And there was something about, I think it was Brad was asked oh, why'd you pick Zane? And Brad said something about how Ford is super high on Zane. So long-winded way of me saying I think Ford is really high on Zane. So I do think he's going to end up in a Ford Cup car, whether it's Front Row or Stewart-Haas, or I'm still saying underrated pick might be the Wood brothers because Harrison has not done very well. And also Harrison is a KHI, Kevin Harvick client, so maybe that could be a connection for him to move to Stewart-Haas, and then Zane takes his place in the 21. I don't know.
Yeah, it's going to be...
The moral of the story here is Ford just has such a mid-driver lineup. It's if you're talking about Harrison Burton and Ryan Preece and,
they're basically banking on...
Penske.
Yeah, it's Penske. That's all it is. Cindric's going to get a little bit better, I still think. But other than that, you've got Logano, who, yes, he just won the championship, but he's also in his, 15th, 16th year coming up. Yeah. So he's not as young as he used to be either. So you're basically just, hitching your wagon to Blaney, who I think is a great driver. And, I still think Blaney's capable of, a super kick-ass, 5-6 win season if Penske ever happens to have, the fastest cars again, like they did in, say, 2014, 2015. Yeah. But even still, that's, one guy. And, I'm high on Briscoe, too, but indeed, the moral of the story is Ford does not have a good lineup.
Oh, and just on a little side note, I want to say Smithfield's bacon is shit. You can get better bacon for $3 at Aldi, but just had to be said there. Ever since they got bought out by that Chinese conglomerate, their bacon's been terrible. But yeah, I know that doesn't have anything to do with anything, but I had to get it in there. So
depends on who you ask.
Yeah,
bacon means a lot to a lot of people.
Yeah. So with that, I think that's a good transition to. So it's recently come out that Toyota was at an aerodynamic disadvantage last season, especially on short tracks and road courses. And so I'm wondering then if Ford is sucking for various reasons, if Toyota is gonna make a huge resurgence this year, because apparently their aero deficiencies have been evened out, and yeah, I is Tyler Reddick going to be a world beater this year in the new and improved Toyota?
I just want to say one quick thing. The thing that they said last year was that they had less drag, which meant that they were faster on some intermediates, but obviously a lack of downforce really hurts you on tracks with slower speed corners. And so, yeah, it's no wonder that they struggled last year. But, yeah, I was going to get to talking about Tyler Reddick. One thing that anybody that's listened to us knows is that there's a lot of things in which we differ a lot from the mainstream opinion on, not everything, but a lot. And pretty much all of us in the community are in a consensus that Chase Elliott, Kyle Larson, and Tyler Reddick, whichever order you want to put them in at a given time, are the three clear best drivers in the sport right now. But now, obviously, most people in the mainstream would agree with those first two. But if you were to believe what most people, like on YouTube or social media or even on TV, think, you would think that Tyler Reddick would not even be a top 5 driver, that even somebody like Christopher Bell would be better than Tyler Reddick. But us here, we're bright, we're perceptive, we see things deeper. So we're going to let the guys here tell you exactly what the deal is with Tyler Reddick and why he is the true member of the triumvirate.
Let's let the number one Tyler Reddick fanboy here take the floor.
Which one?
Actually, I guess that could be two people. But
Who is that? Are you talking about
which one? Other guy? Which one?
Yeah, I don't know who you're talking about. I mean, I guess
you.
Me. Okay. I mean, he's probably my favorite driver. Like Bowman. I would say Bowman and Reddick. It's kind of like a combo. Just my favorite driver. But anyway, that doesn't matter. Yeah, I think he's awesome. Like, I think he's gonna. I don't know. Like with 2311, we saw how fast they were, especially on the intermediates last year, and we saw how fast he was on the intermediates last year in the 8 car. And I just think you put those two things together. Like, I think we're about to see. The comparison that I've brought up before, and this sounds probably a little bit crazy, but like Kevin Harvick 2014, like I think he could do that this year. I don't think that's a stretch with how fast those cars were on the intermediates. Obviously, they got a lot of work to do on the road courses, but like Adam was saying with the Toyotas, who knows if they've corrected that or not, their disadvantage that they had. So, I don't know. I don't have too much to say other than, like, I think Reddick is going to be lights out. Instant title contender now for, like, year in and year out. That's what I think we're looking at here with him in the 45.
I mean,
yeah, and
once upon a time...
Go ahead.
Yeah, once upon a time, and about 15 years ago, there was actually another driver who switched from Chevy to Toyota. I think it was in 2008, maybe, and
yeah,
I think he had a pretty good year that year. I think he
another
won,
good comparison.
8 races.
Yeah,
that's the first thing I thought of. It was like
now replaces him.
Yeah, comes in there with replaces that guy, and if the hype about Toyota this year and having their equipment actually improved on the road courses and short tracks is actually legit. I could easily see him having sort of a Kyle Busch 2008 crazy breakout year, and probably continue it actually in the post and not just implode after 26 races like Kyle Busch did. But yeah, I mean, I think that I could easily see that happening, and that's not something I would consider to be out of the question.
I feel like the field is a bit too deep, for a season that, and as dominant as like Harvick in 2014, or maybe even Kyle in 2008. But I absolutely see him being no less than a top 3 driver this year. On that note, though, Kyle Busch, what do we think about?
I just want to elaborate on one thing with Reddick. So I'm making the Harvick 2014 comparison, and the reason why is if you think back to that season with the 4 car, like you remember how many weird ass
pit crew
especially early on the pit crew, and we've seen 2311 have some like major pit crew issues, and now this year they're gonna have brand new crews. Like Denny wanted to hire his own guys, so I'm pretty sure both cars this year are gonna have custom made pit crews that we've never seen them have before. So I think there's gonna be some growing pains. So the way I see Reddick's season playing out especially like the first half, is a lot of dominance, a lot of like lights out races, but the win count might be still a little bit low because I could see the pit crew maybe, screwing him out of some races and that type of thing. Anyway, I just wanted to elaborate on the Harvick 2014 comparison there, and then I guess I'll say real quick too, my one reservation is maybe I have not been super high on Billy Scott as a crew chief in his previous, drivers he's been with. But at the same time, he's never had, like, a budding superstar like Reddick right now. So I could be totally wrong, and he could be great. So anyway, I'm done.
Yeah, what I was going to mention was Kyle Busch. I kind of feel like, I probably said this for, like, the last 2-3 years, but, I think people are forgetting, what he's still capable of, and I think now that he has all these distractions out of the way, although I guess there is that little incident he had down in Mexico that probably wasn't the best look, but I think he's more motivated and more confident than he's been in a little while, and he's really going to want to make a statement. It's just a question of how good and how reliable RCR is going to be, but I feel like people are. It's just because we know how good he is when he's capable of it. I just feel like people are sleeping on him.
Yeah, like I don't necessarily think that he's going to be quite as fast as he was at JGR, but I think that RCR is the best strategic team in the Cup Series, and with Kyle's big brain and ability to remember every scenario from every race he's ever been in, I think they will strategize the living shit out of his races, and I think they will compete for wins that way, where he'll be the 5th or 6th best car in a race, and I think, he and their brain trust will cook up some crazy strategies to get him to the front, and I could definitely see him winning races like that. And let's face it, their cars are reliable, and I think they're probably more reliable than JGR was. And yeah, I think he will be in, I think he'll be a solid top 10, not necessarily always top 5, but he will be involved in almost every race this year. And yeah, it's going to be fun to see what he does.
I'm going to say top 5. I'm going to say he comes out in the top 5 of TDR.
Wow. Okay. I'll believe it.
I think it's going to be a lot. I just questioned how much he actually cared all of last year, or at least part of last year, and second half especially when he was largely invisible. I think this year he's going to come out there with a chip on his shoulder and will, really want it. I think that's going to be, difference maker in how he does. So I think with that in mind, I think it's going to be a really strong start, to say the least, for him. I think he'll probably get a win or two early on, maybe in the first 10 races, I'm thinking. Maybe a mile and a half, Auto Club. But I think he'll be, I think he'll look a little strong this year. I think he'll...
Yeah, I'm split on him.
Or just look like a contender again.
Yeah, I'm split on it. On one hand, it is a pretty significant downgrade in equipment from Gibbs to RCR, and, it's very hard to overlook that. But at the same time, for a lot of drivers, I've never been huge on the idea of a driver's mental state unless it's just really, really affecting their driving that much, unless it's something that's just really profound or severe. But Kyle Busch is a case where, for him, I think motivation matters more than it does for most drivers, and how much he's really into it. And, it's been proven by time in his career where you could clearly tell that he was on a mission, that he had something to prove. Like when he had his injury in 2015 and he went on that super hot run in the summer, which then ended up in the championship that he won. And, the last few years, or the last 2, I guess you could say, it's clear that he's been really unhappy with the situation at Gibbs, with the contract situation. And, on one hand, I kind of feel bad for him because he has kind of been dealt a crap hand here with going to a lower tier ride. But at the same time, it is kind of his fault because he was asking for a really big salary that Gibbs wasn't really willing to pay. They didn't really have the funding or the money anymore to do it. If he'd really wanted to stay with them bad enough, he could have. But I guess you could say maybe that was just because he was really unhappy there, and he figured, well, if I'm not going to get paid like I want, I'll just go, even if it's to a car that's lesser. And maybe that was his decision making. I don't know. But, you know, I can tell that he's definitely looks motivated and look like he's got more energy this year. I'm loath to bring up Denny Hamlin as like a source for any kind of insight, but on his new podcast he's got with his little simp friend that he talks to, he was talking about Kyle Busch is pretty much kind of like a conspiracy theorist in that he tries to make and manufacture all these scenarios where the world is against him, like whether it's actually true or not, and that, you know, he has to pump himself up, like sort of like his brother, but in a different way. And like he really appears to be really negative a lot of times, but sometimes it's genuine, but I think sometimes that's just his way of pumping himself up, I guess. And I definitely see a bit of a spark in him that there hasn't been in a while. Like, you know, like normally, like the little pissing contest he had with Logano, like that's not a good thing. But in another sense, I guess you could say it's good because it shows that he cares. And like we haven't seen that kind of fire from him.
Dummy said all this about Kyle.
Yes.
Okay.
So, yeah, you can see a bit of a spark in him that you haven't seen the last couple of years. And so for that reason, I think I'm a little bit more bullish on him doing well than maybe I was a couple of months ago. Now that I've thought about it more, but I have to say I still see his ceiling as probably about a 7th, 8th place guy that maybe can eke out 2 or 3 wins, but I don't know.
Yeah, he reminds me of Kyle right now. Reminds me a lot of Tony Stewart in the sense of being very motivation dependent, and you know, it's like if he can keep his head on straight and if he cares, he can dominate. But if his head's not in the game and he's pissed off and pouty about something, then he really isn't much of a factor at all. And the problem is with Kyle, it's like it's hard to really predict when he's going to be fully engaged and when he's going to be motivated. I mean, you'd think this year, of all years, he would be, but how long will that last? Especially if, let's say they start out slow out of the gates and he's running 15th on speed. Like, is he going to start going full Kyle Busch again and start pouting? I mean, it's hard to know, really.
Yeah.
For me,
absolutely. You go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, the more I've thought about this move of him going to RCR, the more I feel like it's a picture-perfect fit for him, because if we think about car owners who, like, revel in this mentality of, like, everybody's against us, like, what car owner would you think of for that? You would think of Richard Childress, right?
Jack Roush is actually the first guy who comes to
mind. That's another one, too, but Roush is, like... Is he even alive anymore? I don't know. But like still
has a pulse.
Anyway, I just see that being a really good fit. The more I've thought about this, like Kyle's kind of rough around the edges mentality. I think we've even seen it like at the first part of this year, like the interviews, like he's making weed jokes about his sponsor and stuff. Like I don't know, he's just
good thing he's not making any gun jokes.
Yeah.
Pack of Geek in Mexico.
But anyway, like
a Fiesta.
I see it being a good fit, like right off the bat. Like I think he's gonna be. If I had to like make a declarative statement, I would say he's gonna be one of the 5 best drivers this year. Because we've seen like there's been a lot of talk about it's a downgrade in equipment and stuff, and it's like, well, I guess on the surface it is, but that 8 car last year with Reddick was hauling ass on the intermediates. They were so good, and you think about Kyle, like that's been his best track type the past couple years. Really, has been the intermediates. So, I see it being a really good fit, and like I think he's going to elevate the whole organization. I think Dylan's, which is going to be annoying because I don't like Dylan, but I even think like he's probably going to benefit from Kyle being there. The more I think about it, the more it feels like a really, really good match.
He's definitely in that kind of late career before he totally dropped off Tony Stewart phase of where, he would just kind of ride around a lot. But then, the 2011 chase, he just decides, oh, I'm going to be the best driver in the world that I'm capable of being. And, so I'm not sure if Kyle has a run like that in him, but he's definitely still a top 3 or 4 talent in the sport. And it's not like, not like a guy like Denny Hamlin, who obviously gets, as the best crew chief in the garage, which is why he looks so good. But, during that whole stretch from 2014-ish through 2018, there was nothing in there that, said, oh, well, this is a guy who obviously can be running top 3 or 4, if blah, blah, blah. But, it's just a matter of, whether or not he decides to turn it on or not. And I definitely think the whole incident in the clash with Logano, there was definitely a fire in there that we saw that, obviously he and Logano have a bit of a history with each other, and Logano is probably one of the few guys who can make Kyle Busch look like the good guy in a rivalry, just because he's such a terrible villain. I mean, it's like Kyle's this, doesn't give a fuck. He leaves his emotions on his sleeve, and Logano's like this, happy-go-lucky, guy off the track. And then, I mean, Kyle's completely right about him. He's a total two-face. But, I guess I'll let Jimmy
Kyle Busch
talk
is
here.
kind of like, at this point, he's almost like
noting, I think, is I believe when Stewart went to Stewart Haas and when Kyle Busch went to Childress, I think they were both 37. They were the same age. So it's not unfeasible to think that, we could see a very similar Kyle Busch as to what we saw at Stewart, just in that sense. They were the same age, but obviously Kyle's been around in racing and cut for a lot longer, but same age, probably the same number of competitive years up in the tank. So I think that's something to take note of with that. I think both going from Toyota to Chevy, and I think it'll be interesting. I think it's going to be a good fit for Kyle, and I think Childress is kind of on the way up in terms of overall equipment and competitiveness, but they just haven't really gotten to show it up until recently, just because they didn't necessarily have the best drivers to do so, or they were just so raw and young raw prospects that they couldn't fully draw up the potential until 2021, 2022. So I think I had there.
Should we at this point talk about the 500 or look ahead?
Just one last point I wanted to make. Like, Kyle Busch, to me, I don't really even consider him a villain anymore, because as far as that goes, he's pretty much at this point a guy that's all bark and no bite. Like, he complains a lot, but he never really does anything other than just kind of talk. He's kind of like almost got a dry wit to him now that's a bit like Kenseth, but just a little bit more of an acidic bite to it. And I kind of identify with that. I mean, he does, get a little bit too whiny at times, but I absolutely am always going to side with him in any kind of.
I agree with that, but I think he's still a villain because he plays it up. He embraces that role. But I mean, yeah, he's definitely grown on me as a character and as a personality. I'll probably never actively root for him, but he definitely has that kind of villain with charm.
I would probably call him, if anything, probably an anti-hero more than a villain at this point. It's probably a better description, maybe. I don't know.
think that better suits his brother, or at least, during that whole middle portion of his career. I don't think Kyle's quite at that, but.
Well, I was just thinking, but what the real reason that Kyle was mad at Joey wasn't about what happened on the racetrack. It's because he's jealous of Joey's new hair transplants. His own hair is kind of thinning, and so I think that's what was the reason for the real anger. But who knows? Whatever.
Joey's just gonna be Joey.
Yeah.
It's like I said. He has no he like tries to be this superhero on the track or like super villain or whatever, but then you get off the track and he has no character. It's like you have to be rugged to be a villain, and Joey's like this, you know, Northeast Ivy League, ha 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 ha, happy-go-lucky guy, and
That's
like,
a good one.
Does not act like a villain at all. And
yeah. Well, the only thing I was going to say on that note that really bothered me about winning the championship, he's far from my favorite driver, but at the end of the day, I was like, whatever, he get the championship. It doesn't really mean that much to me. The only thing I really disliked about it is that I do feel like it's going to kind of embolden him to be even more of a tool on the racetrack and justify himself more. But at this point, he's going to probably be that way anyways. So it's just one of those things where everybody on the track and all of us watching, we just have to deal with him. He's like that, annoying pest at work that is always going to do stuff and justify it. But, like you say, Joey being Joey. So, but maybe the new hair will improve his mood a little bit and he won't feel so inclined to do stuff, but yeah.
All right. So Daytona, I guess we're on to now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just start by saying that this race, obviously, we all have some level of excitement before it because it is the Super Bowl, basically, of our sport, biggest race that there is in America every year. There's a high level of prestige with it, and, that cannot be ignored. And it's an event that I always used to really, really get excited for. It was basically like a kid getting up for Christmas. But at the same time, I think most of us are also in agreement that it's an event that, for us, it just has lost most of its charm over the years because it's sort of been getting that way for a while, but then especially the last few years, this race, quite frankly, has become a joke because of just the way every single year it just devolves into a shit show at the end. Like just chaos, and usually somebody that probably doesn't deserve to win it wins it, and even if they do, it's just a total drag in the end. Like some of the races have been really good, like last year's, for instance, up until we get to about 20, 30 laps to go, but then every time, like clockwork, everybody just starts driving with their heads up their asses, and we have to have a million caution flags, and the last 10 laps of the race takes 40 or 50 minutes to run, and it just ends up being this slog every time, and we're lucky to even have 10 cars running at the end of it. I hope that for once we can have that be different this year, but I'm not really holding a lot of optimism for that. I'll let you guys kind of go off about that, but, I have, like, the standard level of excitement there is for a new season starting, but it's probably nothing beyond that because this race doesn't really mean that much to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's about how I feel. Like, I'm really excited for the season, but I would not say I'm necessarily, like, excited for the Daytona 500 just because it, like you said, it really has, like, lost its luster, and that's just kind of like a bummer and sad, but I don't know. Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah.
I think it's the best way to put it is, the event itself, the prestige surrounding it, the hype for it and all that, that's still, that's always going to be around. It's, it's basically like the Super Bowl of NASCAR, but, suppose the Super Bowl had like 10 awful games in a row or something like that where, it's just completely unwatchable, or there's shit show endings, which I guess some people will probably complain about this year, but fuck the Eagles, so I'm cool with that. I guess what I'm saying is, the race itself, you just kind of have to unfortunately accept it for what it is at this point. And I think the biggest thing that it's missing is, we used to have give and take in these super speedway races. People didn't race every single lap like it was the last lap, try to block both lanes at once, and, cause wrecks, giving, these idiotic bump drafts for no reason as if it's going to win in the race. And, I mean, the all-time example I always go to my personal favorite race of all time, partially because it's the race that got me into NASCAR. But 2007, first 150 laps were this slow sort of climactic build-up, and then after Tony Stewart and Kurt Busch crash, it's just the greatest climax of an ending to a race that you'll ever see. I mean that's what the Daytona 500 is supposed to be to me, but now you have everybody just wants to stick around the whole race, and you usually get one wreck early, then everybody just goes single file for a while, and then at the end everybody loses their brains again. But I still think I'm still going to wake up on Sunday and be really excited for the race, but I can't exactly say my expectations are too high.
Yeah, we're in this weird place with Daytona where even though it's the most prestigious race on the schedule, like it's clearly the worst of the three super speedway tracks. I mean, last year both Atlanta and Talladega put on, for the most part, like good, clean racing where the best drivers got to the front, and the races were honestly decided on track, and they weren't that much of a shit show. Whereas the Daytona races for the last 7-8 years have just been a disaster, almost every one of them. And it's like, I don't know if it's because the track is so narrow or what, but like Daytona is just the worst of super speedway racing.
They really screwed up the repave, I think. Like it's not aging like at all. Like it did on the previous surface.
Yeah, that was the thing about the old Daytona, is it had
handling mattered. Yeah,
you could drive around. Everybody didn't just run in one single file line around the track. You could move around. You had multiple crews. You could make passes by yourself.
And I think
it's just a narrow Talladega now.
Well, and I think that's why Atlanta was so good last year, even though it had fresh pavement, is that the turns are a short enough radius and the banking is just low enough that handling still mattered, and it almost raced like a pre-repaved Daytona. And I think, like Merv said, like the pavement hasn't really aged at all since 2011. I mean, guys can take no tires for an entire stage and run just as well as a guy with 4 tires. And until the pavement starts aging, I think unfortunately this is the kind of race we're going to continue to see. And I don't trust the drivers to control themselves enough to stop making stupid blocks and to stop racing every lap like it's the last lap. I think that's just the way they race now. And, look, like you guys said, it is what it is. I'm still really excited just because it's the start of the season, but I don't really put a whole lot of weight on who wins this race, and that's kind of a shame.
Yeah, 2 things on that. Like, first off, I have to literally think for a few seconds every time that I try to remember who won the 500 last year. Like, oh, it was Austin Cindric. Like, it's something I have to put thought into. That's something I never used to have to do. Sorry, poor grammar. And then, well, I was going to say something that I forgot, so I guess I'm going to have to pass it. So I'm not having a good show here. Bear with me, folks. But
yeah, I mean, think of, like, for me, I will always wake up on race day for Daytona, be excited to a degree. It's the biggest race of the year, and that's always something to look forward to. But yeah, at this point for me, it's just been like I expect it to be chaos, and I'm going to finish that will make plenty of people mad, or we'll have some sort of controversy, and we'll probably last an hour to finish the last 10 laps. Like 2019, where I think it even took over an hour to finish the last 10 laps. And like some people said, you have guys out there who they drive like psychos on the plate track. So you could say you got the Ricky Stenhouses, the Brad Keselowskis, Ross Chastain everywhere. They're guaranteed to cause a wreck. Like, I would be shocked if there wasn't a wreck that one of those 3 guys did not cause on Sunday. And, some are more crazy than others and more well-known for wrecking prowess. But, it's at this point you just come to expect that there's going to be a bunch of wrecks. There'll probably be happens, and there's going to be a certain group of guys that'll 100% be causing and hopefully also being involved afterwards result in some of those big wrecks. And, back even 10 years ago, guys did not race like that. They were, for the most, they were so crazy, but they were chill. They would have patience. They would lift. They would give guys room and wouldn't decide I'm going to cause a 25-car wreck because I guess Tony Stewart did, but for the most part, guys aren't doing that at these play tracks. Like in 2012, 2013, you just didn't see that. And now it's, I guess, every man for themselves, and if you block me, then I'm going to wreck you. I don't care what happens behind me, but you come to expect that part, and you always hope, though, that maybe this year will be different, and that should be like that was a good ending to a race, and it wasn't a total train wreck at the end of the race, but we'll have to see.
Yes, because they don't have Larry Mack in the booth anymore to say, boys, that ain't going to work.
As much of a relative defender of stage racing as I am, I kind of feel like that's when this all sort of started, of every plate race becomes a shit show because, guys have to race hard early in the race, not just at the end of it. But it's I think you guys sort of touched on it, but the biggest thing that just really devalues this race is the fact that you can't really put any stock into who wins or who finishes up front, especially, and it used to be like if somebody like, I don't know, some underdog finished in the top 5 or something, it would be like a really impressive, really good race for them. But now you can just finish 5th basically just by not getting involved in a wreck.
It's right at the back all day. It's part.
And it's nothing impressive about that. There's nothing impressive about just avoiding all the wrecks all day and then taking out the leaders on the last lap. I don't need to say who I'm referring to there, but it's just winning this race is just so meaningless now at this point. Running up front means something, but winning, it's just like anybody can wreck the whole field and ride at the back and not get involved in a wreck.
Yeah, 2016 definitely seemed like the year that went from, that was their last year of an actual ending. And then once those stages came in, 2017 came along, it was, how many, there had to be at least 3 or 4 big ones in that 2017 race. No, there was at least 3. So there was thinking of all those wrecks and that race in general. It's still a interesting finish because of the fuel mileage. Remember, at that point, it had actually calmed down. But to me, that's like the little marker where it went from generally pretty good races to total shit shows.
It's hard to say when the exact jump the shark moment was, but I don't know. I feel like 2018 was kind of the first one that, to me, just really, this was how we ended the Daytona 500. And then I guess 2020 and especially 2021, though, was when it just went like, all right, this race officially does not mean anything in terms of building a driver's legacy.
Yeah, for me, 2018 was the first one that was just an atrocity. And then 2019 was basically the same thing. And then 2020 took it a step further. Wasn't a terrible race throughout, but we obviously know what happened at the end. And then 2021 was a case where the point I was going to make a minute ago that I couldn't think of was the big problem is that there doesn't seem to be any in between with how the guys race. Like, it's either they're all out, just driving like it's the last lap of the season, on lap 30, or like what happened in 2021, after something happens, or sometimes when it hasn't even happened, they just run in the Thomas train formation around the top of the racetrack the whole time, single file with no racing, like they did in that race for like 70% of it, basically. That was genuinely one of the most awful races I've ever seen in my life, and the ending only made it worse. And so that was the worst one, probably. Last year was the first one that I would say wasn't just an atrocity since 2018, but it still had, all the earmarks of the shit show ending and just the annoying result where you had a pretty random winner that was basically because he survived out of all the cars that were left. And, I want to be more optimistic about this race, but history has not given us reason to be so.
I mean, last year was a pretty historical race. I think it was one of the first times I've ever seen a single driver cause 3 accidents in one race, at least. That was impressive.
Brian Vickers has entered the chat.
I'd say the 500 then. But we've seen guys do 2, but 3 wrecks, causing 3 wrecks, and of course getting pretty much through scot-free and having a chance to win at the end. That makes it even better, luckily.
Yeah,
we didn't go that way.
All right, should we go into kind of our
winner?
Yeah, our winner predictions, or does anyone else have anything to say?
Yeah, we needed Pumpkinhead here to point out 5 incidents in just 1 race, Steve. Isn't it awful? And it still gets worse.
What is happening?
That's a pretty good impression.
Yeah, that was pretty good for Jimmy Spencer.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add. Like, it might be my least favorite track on the circuit now, which is just sad. Like, even it's between that and Texas, obviously, which goes without saying what a disaster that place is. But I don't know if there's I don't know if there's another track that I enjoy watching races at least than Daytona in the past 10 years, I guess. I don't know how long or when it started, but yeah. So I don't have too much to say. I agree with everything that's been said.
Yeah, let's get to our predictions.
Yeah.
All right, I guess I'll go first then. Why not Kyle Busch? I think nobody has a bigger statement to make right now than he does that could be considered a realistic contender. And he's never won it before. And I thought last year we saw, we have this whole meme about how Brad has never won the 500 despite winning every other plate race and for a long time being considered the best plate racer in NASCAR. And the first year he leaves Penske, his old car wins. I think this year maybe kind of the opposite of that. Kyle Busch was at Gibbs all that time, never won, and maybe the first year after leaving he wins in the 8 car.
Or Ty Gibbs wins.
At 454 now. God only knows.
Yeah,
maybe not.
I don't know, but I just have a gut feeling. I just have a gut feeling about Kyle Busch.
Yeah, I mean, I have 2. There's 2 picks, a gut feeling of what I think should happen. Then there's the almost logical, almost a logical pick of how the past couple of races gone. My gut feeling is that the classic shit show Daytona will continue, and of course the guy that everyone's been hoping to get that first 500 won't finally do it, and that'll be Brad, presumably wrecking the leader in the last lap to do it. In a race, I'll probably have. I would assume there'll be maybe less than 10 cars running. They'll be complete.
Hey, let me ask you something. Do you like Brad Keselowski? I don't think you've clarified this.
I think I'll go, and I think it's sort of that based on what you've seen at these tracks the last how many years? 5 or 6 years. So I think it'll come down to that, and upping the leader in the last lap and winning is the worst type of 500 finishes, but that's probably what's going to happen this year, and maybe it'll be Brad, maybe it'll be somebody else. I could see Stenhouse doing that, unsurprisingly. But that's what I think will happen. And if other side of me is thinking it's a random winner that shows up once or twice a year, so I've sometimes said Briscoe a few times for some reason, though he hasn't really ever done anything in a plate race, but that's my other little side of me. It's thinking somehow going to be Briscoe that wins, which that's a crazy out there pick. But more likely than not, I think it'll probably be Brad winning. But if Briscoe does win, just know that I did say it beforehand.
Yeah.
That's what I got.
On the bright side, he's going cup racing.
He is. So I think the duels are going to be pretty tame, kind of like they have been in the last few years, where guys are just feeling out their cars, mostly running single file, not enough cars in the draft to really create a whole lot of passing. So I don't know that we're going to see a whole lot happen in the duels, but as far as the 500, I mean, I think it's going to be a Penske show at the end. If they survive, I think it'll probably come down to Logano, Blaney, and Cindric, one of them pushing another to the win, which, I wouldn't be too upset about. But yeah, I'm with you guys that it's going to be a shit show one way or another, and I just hope we have, I hope we have at least 25 to 30 cars running in the last 10 laps to at least make it fun until the inevitable green-white checker.
Yeah, my pick to win is Blaney, just because I think in this last, again, whatever timestamp you want to put on it, 5, 6, 7 years, whatever. Ultimately, in this era where it has been a shit show, Blaney, I feel like, has been the one common denominator of guys that are like almost always there at the finish. Like we saw him barely got beat last year, barely got beat in 2020, So I think he's still the best super speedway driver in the series right now. So pretty boring pick for me, but I'm saying Blaney finally does it.
Yeah. Picking a winner in this race, which for the reasons we kind of already described, is pretty meaningless or pretty useless. But, there's guys that you expect to be fast that are always like Blaney, and Bubba Wallace would be another one. And naturally, the Fords are always fast at these tracks. Like qualifying, I was already talking about in the chat earlier that, it's the common thing each year with this race is that on qualifying night, it's a Hendrick lockout, and they're real fast in qualifying, but then they suck in the race. And then the Toyotas, they may not be the fastest, but they always manage to find their way near the front when it matters, and it's pretty much a battle between those two. But really, what it all comes down to, it's whoever is the best or is in the best position that's left at the end after all the carnage has happened. There's huge emphasis on luck, blind chance, really. You just can't really say who's going to be there at the end or who's going to be left. It's not going to be taken out in some dumb crap or whatever. I do think, on a more general note, that it'll be a pretty clean race up until the last 20 or 30 laps. I think that they're capable of doing that and being that way up until it gets to the critical part of the race. Like the 400 was sort of that way last year, where we got a lot of good racing until it completely just turned into a disaster. But still, there's going to be a lot of carnage at the end, and you just can't say for sure who it's going to be. But tentatively, I'm going to say Joey Logano, because in some strange kind of way, this feels kind of like a thing where I think he'll carry some momentum into the early part of the season, kind of like the way Dale Jarrett did at the end of 1999 to the beginning of 2000, before kind of quickly fading out. I can see this kind of being a thing where there's this obnoxious Joey car wash where he wins the championship and then wins the 500, and everybody salivates over him for 2 months, and then he disappears. But that's not really based on a whole lot of logic or whatever. I mean, he's a solid super speedway racer, not amazing, not as great as his record would indicate, but I'm just kind of feeling it. That's just kind of the vibe that I'm getting. But, really, you can't say or make a certain pick about anyone.
As far as Joey goes, I can't remember the last, defending series champion that was, this underwhelming. I guess it would also be him, probably 2018 to 2019.
Yeah.
But, normally it's defending champ comes in, it's oh, he's the defending champ, but with him it's just yep, there's Joey. He's just going to probably do what he normally does. He'll get 2-3 wins and then make the round of 8. And then, depending on what happens in the round of 8, will determine. I guess it's an odd year, so he won't make the championship for. But I don't know. Just a thought I just randomly had.
Yeah, I think it'll be one of those races for sure where you'll see, a couple early cautions for 1 or 2 car wrecks where somebody spins out coming off of 2. It's the inside wall out of the race. And that's it pretty much. And then, once it gets to, 50, 40 to go, then basically becomes the whole different race where everyone's going to start throwing stupid blocks, causing wrecks, and I bet you those last 40 laps will take longer than the first 160 laps do because of all the wrecks that are going to happen then, and there'll be. I'm going to say there's going to be more than one red flag. Hopefully all cars stay on all fours and we don't have everybody going over on the roof like we did 2020 and last year. So hope for that. But I'll be something to expect on Sunday.
Yeah. Well, one other random thing I wanted to mention that I was going to. We haven't really talked about, nor are we going to really talk about some of the guys in the kind of, I don't know what you call fun rides or exhibition rides or whatever, like these frivolities that always show up for speed weeks, like the money team or whatever it is you want to call it, and the wear entries that we have. But one that I am interested in that we're going to see is Travis Pastrana. Now, I'm not predicting him to actually do well per se, but he is making a comeback after I don't know how many years it is since he made a foray into the Xfinity Series years ago. And not only is he going to be driving, he's going to be driving in what should be a very fast race car, a third 23XI entry. And look, I mean, obviously, there's not much competition there, and it's not the same level of racing, but he came back and he actually won a modified dirt race just a couple of weeks ago. And from what I remember, he wasn't actually that bad at super speedway racing, albeit,
he was pretty, when he was in the 60 car for Roush, I think he was pretty decent. I remember him doing well at Talladega. He might have won a pole there, not that plate qualifying matters, but I remember him being decent there. And then, actually, it's not, I know he ran a truck at Vegas for Nice, maybe 4 years ago. I think that was the last time he was in one of the top 3 series.
Speaking of that, he's also running the truck race this year, too.
There is another pretty notable guy I think is worth mentioning here.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, Austin Hill, right?
Yeah, obviously.
Best driver.
Everyone's favorite future meth head, or actually current meth head, I should say.
Wow.
Jeremy Mayfield, he's back.
Yeah, I was like, when did Mayfield come back?
Yeah. Bringing back.
Obviously, Ryan's talking about Jimmy Johnson.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, I thought for a second maybe you were talking about Helio, but no, he's not going to be any kind of factor.
Yeah.
Helio.
I mean, Jimmy will qualify at speed, I think.
I'm a bit disappointed. I thought we were going to have more entries, and it seemed like, obligatory fuck Rob Kaufman. I missed the days when we would have 55, 60 drivers attempting this race, and, people can go on about how that was always going to be unsustainable, but, it was just part of the prestige of the Daytona 500 that it was such a hard race to qualify for, and, now we're going to have 2 guys not qualify, one of which I think obviously is going to be Connor Daly. The car just isn't as fast as any of the others. But, it sounded for a while like we were going to get at least 44, 45 entries, and to only end up with 42 is a bit disappointing.
Last year's, didn't 2017, 2018, did we even get 40 cars? I think there was some years with 39.
We've always had at least 40 cars.
But it's been that with entries, it's been 40.
Last year we had 44, but some of them were just total slugs. So I guess that is the one good thing this year is that everybody probably besides the money team car has a good chance at not just making the race but being competitive in it.
Yeah. I still can't. Pastrana just such a weird one. I didn't see that coming at all. I don't know what he's gonna do. You could easily see him actually hanging around and honestly being in the top 10 and doing stuff. But I could also see him crashing out early, in the early first half of the race. It's one of those weird combos.
The undoing.
I don't know what to expect from that. It'll be interesting, I think, to see how he does. Assuming he makes a race, how he runs Sunday. But we'll have to see. And, Jimmy, I think, will have an experience. I mean, he only got out of the car 2020. I mean, it's a whole different car. But, the plate tracks are still the plate tracks in 2020, and people haven't changed how they race there. So it'll be a usual survival game, and I think the guys that have done this before will know that and have a chance to figure out where they're going to be all day. But yeah, I think it'll be good, though, because I think there's going to be, in terms of truly competitive teams that actually have a shot at winning on Sunday, I think it's higher than it has been in a pretty long time, honestly.
Yeah. For the record, I want to say that we do plan on doing a show next week, and it's going to happen no matter what. But as you guys know, my ass is pretty puckered up about Jimmy P in this race for a number of different reasons. But I'm just going to say it right now. If he wins, it's going to be a pretty long break I'm going to be taking from the community. I'll do the show, but as far as the server goes, I'm going to have to stay away for a bit if he wins. So, but I'm nervous about this one, but we'll see what happens.
That's me too. You know who, if somebody wins, there'll be a mute for.
Well, nobody's going to be really celebrating that, so I don't think you have to worry so much.
Yeah, at least nobody will be happy about it. Well, no one's going to be celebrating. At least someone here will be celebrating Kevin winning. I don't think. The guy we did have isn't here anymore, so no, I don't think anybody's going to be really going crazy over a Harvard Daytona 500 win, so well, who knows?
I doubt we'll probably get super in-depth with this, but Jimmy getting brought up just made me think that I wanted to say this, but I'm really fascinated this whole year to see what this Legacy Motor Club thing looks like. Like, they're probably the team I'm most interested to see, based on what Jones did last year, and then Jimmy coming in, I think has to give that team a lot of energy going forward. And obviously Noah is he's interesting, I guess is the word I would use. So I don't know. I just wanted to mention that because we haven't touched on them as far as the full season outlook. I think they're probably the one team that I'm really interested to see how they do.
Yeah. See, I think Drax is still going to take a few years to really get, maybe not a few years, for a little bit to get into the swing of full-time cup racing. I mean, I don't think he's a total hot prospect, but I don't think he's going to be a total bomb doler either. I just don't know what he's going to do this year, but Jones, I could easily see being that dark horse guy to really take a big step forward and maybe win a couple races this year. I don't know. That could be a bit of a reach, but I could easily see him winning 2 to 3 races this year too.
I think he's a solid dark horse for the 500. Honestly.
I think he's definitely
for real.
He was arguably the best driver on super speedways last year. I think we should wrap this up with qualifying starting. But
yeah, sure. Well, yeah, if you guys, you want to say anything about Xfinity or trucks, or maybe save it for next week, or, what do you want to do on that?
Probably next week.
Yeah. All right, unless anyone of you other guys have anything to add on that, because Merv hasn't been here, we've been here, but he hasn't been here for longer.
I don't have too much more to add, other than, like I said in the opening, I'm really excited for the season. Last year was my favorite Cup season in a long, long time, and I guess I'm going into it with a little more. I'm not expecting it to be as good as last season, so maybe I'm hopefully leaving some room for myself to be surprised, maybe if it is or whatever. But yeah, I'm excited. As far as Xfinity and truck, I think Xfinity is going to be pretty fun. I think that's a fun field with obviously Custer's going back down there, and now you got Nemechek and Parker Kligerman's full time. So I think that's going to be a fun field. Trucks is just going to be
shout out our boy Parker.
Yeah, definitely. Trucks is just going to be Zane Smith destroying that field, in my opinion.
Yeah.
He is so much better than the rest of that field. I think he could get 10 wins. But yeah,
combination.
Yeah.
But other than that, man, I don't have too much to add.
Well, I guess there's a lot of things that we didn't really touch on or just barely graze the surface of today. It was a little bit all over the place, and a lot of that was my fault. I apologize to those of you listening for that. We'll try to cover some stuff that we maybe didn't get to this week, like we didn't even really talk about Chase Elliott or Kyle Larson or a number of other guys or some of the race teams or like a lot of things, but haven't done this in 3 months, and some of us haven't done it any longer, so it's a little bit tough trying to piece it all together, but we'll try to make it more smooth as we go along. But thank you guys for bearing with us. If that's all you guys have to say about anything, I guess I'll finish it up.
I think I'm good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, all right then. This was the TRC Podcast, episode, I think it was episode 21 or 22. I'll have the right one on the video. But thanks, guys, for listening. We're going to post this to YouTube. Be sure to not only just watch, but if you like what we do, like the video, subscribe. And the best thing you can do is leave a comment, because that's what helps us the most in the algorithm. If there's anything interesting that you wanted to say, or a question you wanted to ask us, or something that you would want us to do in a future show or talk about, drop us a line, say something in the comments, because that's what helps us more than anything. Like I said, we'll probably do a show next week where we recap what happened over the weekend, as well as cover some of the stuff that we didn't cover this week. I don't know who's going to be all with us next week. I mean, me and Ryan will be here, obviously, but I don't know who else. We might have David back. I don't know. He was going to originally be on this show, but just didn't quite work out. But either way, we'll find something. And then after that, I'm not sure what our plans are going to be. We're definitely not going to be doing this show every week like we did last year, because to be honest, that was pretty draining to deal with. Doing this show late and then sacrificing sleep over it every week. But we'll try to have it be semi-regular. I mean, I don't know whether it'll be bi-weekly or maybe once a month or whatever, but we'll find a way to make it entertaining and relevant without oversaturating things. So whatever the case is, I'm excited to start another season of this. Miss a lot of stuff that we missed last year. So thank all you guys for your support. The TRC Podcast is me, Jake, the co-host and producer. Ryan, our head analyst and co-host. Be sure to follow him on Twitter at RJM Analytics. I believe he's got some other stuff that he also does, but I can't remember it off the top of my head. You can just ask him about that if you want to when it's time on his social media or whatever. And yeah, so that does it for the season preview episode. We'll see you guys next week. The sufferer gets vindictive and angry and hateful, and he drives into the back of the championship contender and wrecks his car. 5 incidents in just one race, Steve. Isn't it awful? And it still gets worse.